All right, so our first talk for today is Ricki Barnes, who will be speaking about escaping the vortex, or how I learned to stop procrastinating and get things done mostly. So a little bit about Ricki. Ricki Barnes is a full-stack developer contributing to challenging the impossible at the Minderoo Foundation. Her colleagues know her as a hard worker with an eye for detail. From her first homework extension in year 3 through 2 undergraduate degrees and over 15 years of industry experience, Ricki has honed her procrastination abilities to a truly expert level. Despite several gratifying achievements, such as never handling in a single assignment on time throughout her second degree, Ricki has embarked on a course correction of avoiding distractions, prioritising daily objectives, and claiming back her time for real goals and priorities. All right, thank you, Ricki.
Hi everyone. As you heard, I am a lifelong procrastinator, and about a year ago I decided to get serious about trying to be more effective. Because I'm not just an accomplished procrastinator, I'm also very easily distracted. And honestly, being an easily distracted procrastinator is very frustrating. I end up cross with myself a lot and being a little bit like, why are you like this? I say this to myself all the time. So I called my talk Escaping the Vortex because Vortex is a shorthand that one of my friends and I have always used to explain this behaviour where you get sucked into something and you can't seem to stop yourself from doing it. And that's even if you've got something else that you should be doing, or even if there's something else that you would rather be doing. So, I'm assuming since you're all here, you know how it feels to get sucked into the vortex, right? So, why do we get sucked into the vortex? There's a couple of reasons. I think it's because the way our brains are wired makes us susceptible to both procrastination and distraction, and also because the things that are meant to engage us specifically leverage that in order to hook us in. I'm going to look at the reasons why we procrastinate and how understanding that can help us overcome it. I'm going to give a couple of examples of when I've procrastinated, dissect the reasons behind it, and then show the strategies that I use to get back on track. With distraction, we're going to discuss a little bit of behavioural science, but not too much because it's complicated and it's kind of a vortex in itself. And then we're going to look at the practical steps that I took in order to overcome distraction. These steps are aimed at both the external and the internal triggers of distraction, and those triggers are things that prompt us towards being distracted. To wind up, I'm going to show some stats that show how I improved my performance at work. If you're wondering where this mostly comes into it, it's because I'm still finding it pretty challenging to overcome distraction and procrastination in my personal life. I'm managing it a bit. It's a bit better than it was. It's a work in progress. So to get started, let's look at procrastination. I think most people are pretty familiar with procrastination. There's something you're supposed to be doing, often something pretty important, but for some reason you just can't seem to get started on doing it. Instead, you're doing something that you know for a fact isn't helpful, like watching TV or scrolling on social media, or you're doing something that your procrastination is sneakily trying to pretend is helpful, like just clearing my desk so I can focus better. So I think when we think about procrastination, the instinct is to kind of write it off as laziness or lack of motivation. Sorry, excuse me. So the fix is easy. If you were a better person with better self-control, you wouldn't procrastinate so much. All right? Now this is obviously ridiculous, and yet it is the most common way that people try and overcome procrastination. You procrastinate, you feel guilty about it, you beat yourself up about it, and then you promise yourself you're going to do better. Maybe you even do manage to do better for a while, but eventually you're going to end up back at procrastination again. So why is this? I think it's because better self-control doesn't address the underlying reasons behind procrastination. So it doesn't get to the root causes. Now, I'm going to show here a list of reasons for procrastination, and it's pretty comprehensive, although I think you can probably think of some others. But, sorry, I'm a little bit overwhelmed, feeling overwhelmed. I think if we look at this, it seems a little bit overwhelming in and of itself, right? This is a very small font to be working with. But I think if we look into it a little more closely, we can see that these root causes, or these reasons, can be broken down into just 5 root causes. Maybe it can, maybe it can't. Yes, it can. Okay, now I'm going to leave out the physical and or mental factors. They're obviously a massive problem for a lot of people, but it's really above my pay grade to be discussing them. The only thing I can say is that if these things are a big issue for you, then you should address them first, because otherwise any of the work you try and do in any of these other areas is going to be undermined. Okay, so, damn it, I keep pressing the wrong button. Right, so if we look at what's left, I think we can see that this can be boiled down into just one thing: avoiding pain. It might be minor pain, like my tax is really boring, or more significant pain, like I'm really stressed, I'm going to do a bad job of my DDD talk and end up looking like an idiot in front of a bunch of people. Newsflash, it's kind of happening, guys, so woo! Look, wherever it is, whatever the reasons, where it leaves us is avoiding the pain in the short term, but then that often leaves us with greater pain in the longer term. And actually, there's a lot of people who work in this space that include that in their definition of procrastination. It's not just that we're putting off an important task, it's also the knowledge that we're going to be worse off for having delayed it. We know this is what's going to happen. And yet, I do it all the time. And that brings us back to, why are you like this? Why am I like this? Okay, well, I think if we look at a couple of examples, let's start with tax, like I was talking about before. It's really boring, right? So the first reason is task aversion. It's boring and it sucks, and because I don't want to do this boring task that sucks throughout the year, I leave it all to the end, where it takes longer and is therefore more boring. And because it takes longer, I need elevated levels of perseverance. But I don't have that because the task is boring and it sucks. Now that could explain everything, right? It's boring, it sucks, no wonder I want to procrastinate. But actually, if we dig a little further into it, there are a couple of things around the future that come into play. So, it doesn't take me long to do my tax, right? It's maybe like an hour and a half. And the government is just going to give me money. They're just going to give it to me. Why wouldn't I just do it? Well, the thing is, by the time my accountant files and the government processes, it's kind of a little bit far in the future. So there's a delayed outcome. It's not like there's a guy standing next to me with a wad of cash going, if you do this for an hour, you can have this. And it's not even that far in the future, but the reason it becomes important is because there's a disconnect with my future self. I'm like, I'm doing all this work so her in 3 weeks' time gets a cash present. What am I getting out of this? Now, what I'm getting out of it is obviously the cash present because I'm the same person. But in the moment, it doesn't feel like that. And the last thing is that this is a bit of an abstract goal. I don't have anything specifically that I'm saving for. There's nothing I've really earmarked this money for. So there's not really anything specific that would make me motivated to strive to do this. Now, if we look at another task, gone a little bit far. If we're going to look at another task, which is a development task that I had to do at work. So we had a bit of a collaborative strategy meeting about what I would be doing, but it wasn't something I'd done before, so I didn't really know what I was doing. So the first one, as you got a preview of, is indecisiveness. There were a couple of different paths I could take. Because I hadn't done it before, I didn't know which one would be the best one. I was also feeling a little bit overwhelmed because I hadn't done it before. I was a little bit out of my depth. Then I had general anxiety, specifically around the deadline because it was a hard deadline and I knew that I had to meet it. It was a hard deadline that was a little bit tight actually, so the pressure was on. Then there's fear of evaluation. And this one is because my leader is this like insane code whisperer genius person. And that's usually a really good thing, but it always adds an extra level of fear about how good my code is. Then there's a bit of task aversion in this one as well. And that's mainly because I could help this by doing a little bit of research. But I really find going on to like Stack Overflow or browsing through random repos usually a bit tedious. So if we put all that together, it's not hard to see why I want to put this off, right? If I don't even think about this task, I'm going to be saving myself a lot of discomfort. But that's only in the short term. In the long term, I'm going to be adding fear of failure to my list because if I waste time, there's a real possibility that I'm going to miss the deadline. All right, sorry. So you can see my reasons for procrastination with both of these things were very different. Okay? Now we've discovered what my reasons for doing this were. Let's see what we can do to help me stop me from procrastinating. This is again a comprehensive list with quite small font of some of the common things that people suggest that you might use to overcome procrastination. Now, I think this is probably a lot to take in, but the one I would suggest paying attention to the most is this figuring out the exact nature of your procrastination problem, which is what we just went through there. I think this should always be the first step because the reasons that we procrastinate, as we just saw, are always very different, and that means that you need different tools to overcome it. You can't apply the same stuff in every situation. Okay, so if we return to my tax problem, these are all the reasons that I was procrastinating, and we'll look at how I'm going to overcome this one. So task aversion, I'm going to address by making a low bar commitment. What I'm going to do in this case is to say, work on this for 5 minutes, and then you can do 10 minutes of whatever you want. I'm going to work on it for 5 minutes again, then I can do 10 minutes of whatever I want. Now this is going to work for me for a couple of reasons. Because it's extremely short term, I'm going to get a reward almost straight away. It's going to stop me from feeling guilty about prioritising my short-term mood because actually, now that I've said I can have those 10 minutes of reward, those 10 minutes are no longer procrastination. They're actually what I said I was going to do in my plan. It's also going to get me started on the task so I can stop feeling guilty that I'm putting it off. I don't have to have that dread hanging over me that, oh God, I really should do it. This is also going to address my lack of perseverance. Because I only have to do it for 5 minutes, it's not really needing that much self-control to keep going with it. The key thing with this is, obviously, once you get started on a task, 5 minutes can slip away really quickly and actually find out it's not as bad as you thought it was. So now that I've got myself started, I'm probably going to be engrossed, and when the 5 minutes are up, I'm maybe not going to want to actually stop. I'm probably halfway through something that I don't want to leave unfinished. So I've got myself moving. So my abstract goal, I'm going to address by attaching meaning to the task. Now there's a couple of things that I can attach meaning to here. Firstly, there's the reward, which is getting my return. Secondly, there's the negative outcome of getting a fine from the ATO, which has happened to me before. Okay, and I actually get fairly frustrated with myself when I end up with a stupid fine over nothing that was completely avoidable. So what I'm going to do is visualise the outcomes of me doing this work, or in that case, not doing the work. I can remind myself that I'm going to be really frustrated if I get a fine, and then I can also visualise that I'm going to get this little return. It's going to be in my bank balance. It's going to be a great time. Okay, I'm also going to reward myself, and that's going to help me with the delayed outcomes problem. It's not an immediate reward like my 10 minutes. What it's going to be is something tangible. So I'm going to get my return from the government, and then what I'm going to do with that is actually say I'm going to buy X with it, specifically something that I want, right? And then I'm going to say to myself, you're not allowed to buy X unless you do your tax return. So now this is my task at work that I was procrastinating on. There's my little things, including the fear of failure that came in at the end. And I'm going to address my indecisiveness by sitting down with someone for 5 minutes and having them act as my rubber ducky. I'm going to have a little conversation. I'm going to be able to outline my thoughts more clearly, and I'm going to clarify how I'm going to work towards a solution. Now, their input is also going to give me other ideas or other avenues that I might want to explore. That's also going to help me with my feeling of being overwhelmed, because now I've got a plan in place. I'm further going to help my indecisiveness and my feeling of being overwhelmed by creating and implementing a plan. What I'm going to do is break this large task down into small and manageable tasks. And then I'm going to set an intermediate deadline for each of those tasks. That's going to help me with my deadline anxiety, because now I'm going to be able to see if I'm getting off track, and I'm going to be able to manage my time more effectively. This is also going to help me with my fear of failure, because if I know that I'm on track all the time, or if I know I'm getting off track, I can ask for other tasks to be reassigned, I can ask for another developer to come in and give me support, any of that kind of stuff. So I'm no longer worried that I'm going to miss the deadline. It's just not going to happen anymore. My fear of evaluation, I'm now in a good place to make a low bar commitment. Even though this task is much bigger than the tax task, I can still get myself going by saying, I'll just do 5 minutes. Because I've got all these interim tasks that are much smaller, they're not as overwhelming to think about as the full thing. I don't have to keep putting it off because I know that there are smaller tasks that I can do. The other thing my tasks are going to do is allow me to choose the order I do them carefully. So for some people, this looks like getting the least attractive thing out the way, right? Someone I used to work with used to say, if you have to eat a frog, eat it first thing. There's another group of people who like to get themselves motivated, feeling good about themselves, and psych themselves up by crossing off a few little tasks. You've got a couple of wins in the bag, you've had a couple of little things that you've ticked off, and so you're feeling good and ready to go on to the other stuff. It doesn't really matter which type of person you are, but if you understand which type, then you can choose your task order carefully, and that can also help you avoid procrastination. Now, I'm going to talk about prioritising your task by importance, which sounds like it kind of countermands the one we've just said, but they work together. Because one of the caveats of choosing your task order is that you can actually use the subtasks to procrastinate on the main task. Because procrastination is very sneaky. I've had a file open, it's the file I'm supposed to be working on, I'm literally working on it, I'm like writing code, and it's still procrastination because it isn't the task that I opened the file to do. The reason I'm choosing to do this little easy task, fixing up the way the header displays, is because I'm procrastinating on the more daunting part of the task. So I'm going to avoid that by also prioritising. If I'm the sort of person that needs to psych myself up, I'm going to give myself permission to do one or two little things and then straight into the next one. So my fear of evaluation, I'm going to sort out by acknowledging that my work is going to have some flaws. And the thing about my flaws is they're not a reflection on my worth as a person, which is how it can feel sometimes, right? Actually, they're a learning opportunity. It's something that I'm going to know better for next time. Now, everything I've done so far actually helps me with my task aversion. Because I'm a lot clearer on what it is that I'm doing, I don't have to, well, probably won't have to, go and consult the internet, right? I don't have to consult it straight away. I might not have to at all. And if I do, I'm going to be able to be more focused in what I'm searching for. I'm not doing generalised research. I'm going to be looking for specific problem solving. So that is also going to be addressed. All right, so you can see that on the surface, these things look similar, right? It was 2 tasks, I was putting them off, I knew it was a bad idea. Probably I'm just a bad person, right? Actually, if we look at it closely, what we can see is not only is this not a moral failing on my part, but the reasons are so different that my strategies need to be different to deal with them as well. And that's what I want you to remember about procrastination. Now I'm going to move on to the second part of the presentation and talk about distraction. Now, I'm not going to be all down on technology. I love technology. But I think it's important for us to admit out loud that in this wonderful world we've built of instantaneous connection and instantaneous content, there are more things competing for our attention than ever before. And a lot of those things were designed to specifically hook us in. They're leveraging that brain pattern to keep us coming back again and again. Right? It's not really surprising under these circumstances that we find ourselves getting sucked into the vortex. Maybe we're scrolling endlessly on social media. Maybe we're binging a whole TV series. Maybe we're hooked on a notification badge, or we find ourselves unable to let an email go unanswered, even though we're in the middle of a task. Now, this might seem innocuous. Like, does it really matter if you take 30 seconds out of your day to answer an email? And actually, it kind of does, and we're going to come back to that. You might also think, if I'm just sitting at home on the couch after work, shouldn't I be able to scroll as much as I want? And yeah, maybe you should. But where it becomes a problem is where distraction stops us from doing the things that are really important to us. So in your personal life, that might look like you not being as present for your kids as you'd like. It might look like you're not fully pulling the weight in your relationship. It might look like your house being in an advanced state of chaos all the time. Whatever it is, it's likely to be something that you're aware of, and it's likely to be something that causes you pain. And you know how we like to deal with pain? Procrastination. And that's how you end up in that loop where at the end of the weekend, you've only got 1/10 of your task done, and you know full well it's your own fault because you spent most of the time binging Netflix. So, when this happens, we're most likely going to end up back at, why are you like this? I do it a lot. Okay? Like procrastination, the most easy solution to distraction is better self-control. Again, if you're a better person, you wouldn't spend as much time mindlessly scrolling. Now, I'm going to go into a little bit of this complicated behavioural science we spoke about before, because I want to explain to you something that's called ironic process theory, because this shows why better self-control, mental abstinence, which is using your self-control to stop yourself from doing something that you actually really want to do, isn't the answer to distraction. So it starts with this quote, which is from Dostoevsky. Try to pose for yourself this task, not to think of a white bear, and you will see that the cursed thing will come to mind every minute. He's an outlaw, guys. So fast forwarding 120 odd years, a social psychologist called Daniel Wegner decided to put this to the task. He really liked this quote, so he was like, let's do an experiment. So he had 2 groups. One group was told specifically to think of a white bear for 5 minutes. One group was told specifically to not think of a white bear. Now, the group that was told not to failed miserably. They did it on average once a minute. And that's kind of what we're expecting, because this quote rings true for most people, right? The interesting part is the second half of the experiment was to tell both groups to think of the white bear. And when they did that, the group that had initially suppressed the thoughts of the white bear actually brought the white bear to mind more readily than the group who had been told to think of it all along. What Wegner found is that if you try and suppress thoughts of something, it actually makes you more susceptible to that thing. This is called behavioural rebound, and it works in everything from like trying to control addiction to trying to suppress your laughter. All right, so there are a couple of techniques that you can find for trying to deal with intrusive thoughts that are brought to mind that cause behavioural rebound, but they're mostly for things like if you're quitting smoking. For distraction, I've found the easiest way to deal with it is just to remove the stimulus, right? I know that I'm susceptible to alerts and notifications, so what I'm going to do is simply stop that from being able to happen. So I started with the biggest culprit, which was my phone. I just reconfigured it. So I uninstalled some apps, goodbye Reddit, goodbye Wordscapes, and it didn't take long for me to be broken from the habit of those two things, right? And actually an interesting thing happened, which is that my nieces asked me if they could reinstall Wordscapes, and I let them, because they like to play it. It's like, all right, it's a problem for me, but okay. And actually, as it turns out, it wasn't a problem for me. I know it's there, it's still installed. I never open it. They use it, and they're the only ones who do. And that's because I broke the habit. The second thing that I did with my phone was to configure the notifications. So I've always had lock screen notification disabled. That's just how I roll. But I did always have like an audio alert that comes up. You get a little ping, you're like, ooh, what's this? And you go and look at it, right? So what I did with that was I actually configured my do not disturb so that I can have it switched on permanently. So what I let come through is nothing but phone calls. I decided I want pretty much anyone to always be able to get me on the phone. Maybe not your telemarketers, but if something important or crucial is going to happen to my friends, to my family, they're going to pick up the phone and call me. So anyone can always call me, but apart from that, everything else is completely silent. So now, the only way that I know if I've got a text message, an email from a non-work account, a notification from one of the 4 different instant messaging platforms I have, is if I pick up my phone and unlock it and explicitly look for it. This is a great time saver for me because I'm just not picking up my phone as much. All right. Excuse me. Now, the next thing I'm going to talk about is actually dealing with the internal triggers of distraction. So you can see the stuff that I've talked about already is external triggers. There's a little noise, I'm prompted to pick up my phone. But there are also internal triggers, and for me they come up in my moments of peak distractibility, and they're all internal. So it's like, I've finished one task and I'm going to start another, and I'm just going to pick up my phone and, send a text. I've finished a job that I was going to do, and I feel like I need to reward myself. In those moments, I'm most susceptible to distractibility because I'm not just going to pick up this thing and look at it for a few seconds. I'm going to keep doing it. One of the ones I do a lot of the time is like when something is loading or I'm waiting for a 2-factor authentication, something like that. This is literally like a 10-second period, but I can't go for those 10 seconds without being entertained. I just can't. So all these triggers, I need a different approach to be able to deal with. Now, the first thing I did was still configuring my tech, and that was to disable Google Discover. Do you all know what Google Discover is? Are you familiar with this? It's this thing. This is a little screenshot of mine. I haven't looked at the begonia yet. I am still interested. So this was a massive vortex for me Because actually Google is really good at knowing what I'm into. Begonias, cat memes, it's all good. And the problem was that once I had disabled Reddit, it was also popping up like a lot of, well, obviously cat memes, but also a lot of like agony aunt content that I had previously been seeing on Reddit. And I ended up in a little bit of a spiral where I was actually reading like Reddit AITA posts, but just screenshotted on a content aggregator website, which is just, so I was like, all right, Google Discover, you've got to go. Okay? So I think at one point I had looked at an article that one of my friends had posted and accidentally gave it the impression that I care about infant health care in any way, which I don't. But apart from that, it was nailing it with the cat memes, the agony aunt stuff, right? So what I did was to just disable it. And it was a bit of a problem, actually, to try and do that, because how it worked for me was just a single swipe from my home screen. I had to Google quite deeply to work out how to turn that functionality off, but I managed it. And once I'd done it, it was really noticeable just how many times a day I reached for it, because I would swipe and I'd do it a couple of times because it hadn't worked, and then I'd be like, oh, I'm doing that thing again. And the interesting thing about this is, like before, this content is actually available to me at any time. If I open a new blank tab in Chrome, it's just there. That's the default behaviour. But because I broke the little reflex of swiping, it also delivered a pretty big hit to the mental part of it as well. Now, unfortunately, just disabling this one app is not enough to deal completely with my internal triggers of distraction. I also needed a strategy to be able to do that. So the first thing is, I'm going to have to notice the trigger. And ideally, has to be in the moment. You can kind of do it as a retrospective, like, oh, right, I just put my phone down after looking at it for 10 minutes when I was just waiting for two-factor authentication. Whoops. But it's better if you notice it at the time you're doing it. And for me, disabling Google Discover was a really good thing for this because, like I said, super noticeable when I tried to do it and it didn't work. Now, the second step is that I'm going to explore the feelings. I'm not going to judge myself and be like, oh, you're a bad person. What I'm going to do is just think about it for a while. Get curious, wonder why I'm wanting to be distracted. And as before with my procrastination, when I'm thinking about why I want to procrastinate, it is easier for me to understand and sit in the moment if I've interrogated a little bit. It's kind of like Wegner's second group of people, maybe first group of people, the people who are allowed to think about the bear the whole time. I'm not going to be rebounding because I'm allowing myself to think about it. I'm not trying to suppress that thought. The third thing is that I'm just going to wait for 10 minutes. So this is like making a low bar commitment to yourself with procrastination. You just say, I'm going to wait for 10 minutes. It's super easy to do, but actually, once you've noticed a trigger and you've explored the feelings, then the waiting is usually enough of a period to help you cool off, right? And you kind of know that you're not supposed to be getting distracted, so it allows you to sit with those feelings but not have to feel guilty about them. Because you've already made this bargain with yourself, if I wait for 10 minutes, I still want to do the thing after, I'm allowed to do the thing. I don't have to feel guilty when I do the thing because I already gave myself permission. I've already worked through that. Excuse me. All right. Now, I just want to talk specifically about distractions at work because I think they look a little bit different to how distractions in your personal life work. At work, a lot of my distractions kind of look a lot like plain old work because that's mostly what they are. They're often a small task that's come in. It's often pretty urgent. It's often something that is low impact or low importance. It's not usually the big strategic stuff that I'm really trying to work towards. And because distraction is just as sneaky as procrastination, we think to ourselves, oh yeah, that is important. I will just do that thing. And where you end up is in this cycle of churning stuff through and switching tasks frequently. Now, The reason this is a problem for me is because I am easily distracted. So if someone sends me an email, my instinct is to jump on what they sent to me, and do it straight away. Okay? So my problem at work was pretty much similar to in my personal life. It was notifications, notifications, and notifications. Because at work, we have email, obviously. We have Slack within our web team. We have Asana for our broader communications team, so get task notifications. And then we use Teams for the whole organisation, and anyone can talk to me through there. It's a lot of noise every day. So as with my phone, I changed this up by just turning all these off. So I now check it probably like 3 to 5 times a day, check all of those channels. And apart from that, I have Outlook closed, because if you just turn off the notifications, you can still see there's a new email. I explicitly have to quit Teams in the system tray, because if you just close it, it looks like it's closed, but if you get a notification, it pops up. And then I have Slack muted and then closed, because if you just close it, you can still see a little notification badge. And you can see what I was talking about before with this apps trying to hook us in, right? I had to be quite ingenious with all these things to try and stop them from being able to reach me and distract me. Sorry. As for Asana, what I did with that was I turned off the notifications in Slack. So we had an integration. It would send you a message every time that happened. And then I set up a rule in my email to send all of the notifications to a folder that I never look at. So there's now 1,166 unread emails in that folder. I'm pretty proud of that, thank you. And the reason I didn't just disable them entirely is because Asana's kind of hard to use sometimes, and sometimes that is the best way of finding something specific that I'm looking for. So I didn't want to get rid of the emails altogether, but I don't want them cluttering up my inbox. So does this seem pretty extreme? It kind of seemed extreme to me when I was first doing it. So one of the key things was to manage other people's expectations. So this is my leader, our unit manager, everyone else in the web team, and then a couple of other people that I support frequently. I told them that if they needed to get me urgently, then they should pick up the phone and call me. And otherwise, you can try your luck at any time, but I might not respond straight away. And actually it did raise a few eyebrows. People were a bit like, so you're just not gonna let people talk to you about work? But actually, as it turns out, people rarely ever notice that I'm offline for most of the day, and nobody has ever picked up the phone to call me. It seemed pretty daunting to me when I was first doing it, and I think that was because I was in this always on, always available mindset, which I think a lot of us are, right? But it causes no inconvenience to anyone else, and it does make me a lot more effective at work. Because, like I said, I'm pretty easily distracted. I will jump on the nearest thing that came in. And then also because it stops me from task switching so frequently. And now this is where we're going to come back to why does it matter if I take 30 seconds out of my day to reply to that email? The reason it matters is because with frequent task switching, you're actually raising your cognitive load, okay? So cognitive load means it's going to be harder for you to focus back on your first task, your brain is going to be more tired, and you're also going to be much more likely to make a mistake. And that's a problem because I was doing a lot of task switching. I think being at work can feel like sharing out a single bucket of water amongst all the fires that are surrounding you. And you give them all just enough to kind of keep them under control, but it's not enough to douse them usually. And you end up task switching a lot because you need to put out your fires. Now, to address this problem, which I was having a lot, I further switched up my day. I'm going to show you now my task tracking software. And this is what it looked like before I started doing all this stuff. So you can see here, Tuesday was pretty good actually. Yay, Tuesday. But like Wednesday was a complete mess. And these are all the tasks I'm doing. I'm doing like 11 minutes, 25 minutes, 26 minutes, 17 minutes, 22 minutes. It's because I'm still available to anyone and everyone at this time. So I'm getting emails in and replying to them. I'm getting Teams things. I'm also in the mindset of, I'll just get that out the way, right? Because I've got a load of like very small tasks. They're very minor. I can get those done really quickly. And then I'll get on with the rest of my day. And actually, what you can see here is that I'm mostly not getting on with the rest of my day. I'm ending up not being able to focus really even that well in the afternoon either. Especially Wednesday. What a problem. But then all the rest of them, I'm still, kind of managing maybe an hour-ish, a little bit more than an hour. And you can see where I'm most effective is after 4 p.m. on Friday. And that's because nobody could talk to me. And I'm working well and truly past 6 because I have a lot of stuff that I didn't get to do this week because I was doing all this other little crappy stuff. Okay? So here's what it looked like after I started implementing this. So you can see I've still got mostly quite a smallish task up front. And that's me doing my emails, checking Teams, checking Slack, replying to anything that needs a bit of back and forth. And then I'm also going into Asana and planning my day. And then I'm jumping straight into the meaty stuff. I'm focusing for much longer periods of time. And then when I come back after lunch, you can see on some of the days, like Monday, I'm still doing the little tasks. But on other days, I'm doing a lot more focus in the afternoon as well. So it's like I'm still surrounded by fires, but actually now I'm just letting them burn. And it turns out I didn't need to give them as much attention as I was. They actually cope just as well being left alone for a while. The last thing I'm going to finish with is a little bit of my Asana. So this is the 6 months before. This is how many tasks I did. For context, a task for us is anything from like 15 minutes to 4 weeks, so it varies quite a lot. I'd say probably 60% of the tasks are probably 1 to 6 hours, right? So in the 6 months before, I've done 187 tasks. This is about 1.25 tasks per day, which is, seems kind of okay, I'm not sure. This is the 6 months after, so it's gone up like a little bit, but actually this encompasses the period that I was on leave for over Christmas. So actually now my daily rate is now 1.93, which is a lot better than 1.25. Go me. But I was still kind of refining my process at the time. So in the 4 months since then, I've now done 246. So I've done more tasks in 4 months than I did in 6 months, and I'm now up to 2.93 tasks per day, which is more than double what it was before. I'm pretty impressed by it. I hadn't actually looked at these stats before doing this talk. I was just kind of going with like, the vibe feels more productive. I think I'm getting more done. Turns out I was getting more done. Go me. All right. So I'm just going to finish up by telling you what I think the key takeaways are. So I think understanding the reasons we procrastinate and looking into it helps us to choose the best technique to overcome procrastination. Distraction can stop us from doing the things that are really important to us, whether that's deploying a new feature or letting the people we care about know that we're fully present when we're with them. We can deal with a lot of the external triggers of distraction by just configuring our tech. We can deal with the internal triggers, not by suppressing our thoughts, which can lead to rebound, but by being mindful and sitting in our feelings in the moment. And you might get a bit of pushback if you try and configure this stuff at work, but ultimately the results you're going to get are going to be pretty good. And that's all. Thank you for coming.